She did not lower her voice. That was the part people remembered afterward. Not the decision itself. Not the paperwork. Not even the fact that she announced it at the company retreat in front of 43 colleagues, 2 board members, and a catering staff who had stopped moving. She announced it loud. And then she smiled. Marcus didn't flinch. He stood at the back of the Harborview conference room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, and he held the coffee he had not yet sipped, and he looked at Sandra Keel, Director of Human Resources for Bridgewater Compliance Solutions, and he said nothing. Sandra was not finished. "Effective Monday," she said, tilting her chin toward the projector screen as if Marcus were a line item. "The senior compliance analyst position will be restructured. Marcus Webb will transition to junior documentation specialist. Salary adjusted accordingly." Someone at a round table coughed. Sandra smiled at the room. "We appreciate Marcus's years of service and trust he'll embrace this exciting new direction." 43 people looked at Marcus. Marcus set his coffee cup on the windowsill. He thought about his daughter, Lily. She was 9. She had asked him that morning if he could braid her hair for school because her teacher was doing a thing about showing up as your whole self. He had tried. The braid had been crooked and Lily had laughed and said it was perfect. He thought about that laugh. He set his hands in his pockets. He nodded once. Not at Sandra exactly, but at the situation. And then he walked to his seat and sat down and opened his notebook to a clean page. What Sandra did not know, what no one in that room knew, is that Marcus had spent 11 months doing something in the quiet hours after Lily fell asleep. Something no one had asked him to do. Something he had never mentioned in a performance review. He had been documenting everything. 7 years ago, Marcus Webb was not invisible. He was the kind of compliance professional who got called in when other people's problems had already become disasters. He had spent 3 years at a federal contracting firm in D.C., then 2 more at a regional bank during a regulatory examination that lasted 18 months and ended with a consent order that named every other analyst but his work. He understood labor law, FMLA classifications, wage reporting, EEO documentation, and federal audit prep the way a surgeon understands anatomy. Not as policy, but as structure. Then Diane died. She was 34. A blood clot no one caught. Marcus was at the office when it happened. Lily was 7 months old. The grief did not announce itself. It arrived in shifts. First the shock of logistics, a baby, a funeral, a lease, a bereavement policy that gave him 5 days. Then the long quiet of a life that had to be rebuilt around a person who needed him every hour and did not yet have words for any of it. He took the first job that offered flexibility. Bridgewater Compliance Solutions. Mid-tier firm. Not glamorous. Not challenging enough for what he could do. But the hours were predictable and Lily's daycare was 6 blocks away. He made himself small on purpose. He answered emails thoroughly. He did not volunteer for visibility. He declined panel invitations. When colleagues pushed for promotions, he said he was happy where he was. And mostly that was true, and partly it was armor. At home, Lily had a routine that she controlled absolutely. Breakfast choices, bedtime book selection, the order of her stuffed animals along the windowsill. The stuffed rabbit, Biscuit, always went first. Marcus never touched the order. One Tuesday evening, he was preparing a FMLA analysis at the kitchen table. Lily sat across from him coloring. She looked up and said, "Daddy, are you a detective?" He said, "Sort of." "Why?" She said, "You write things down a lot." He said, "Somebody should." Sandra Keel had joined Bridgewater 2 years before the demotion. Her title was Director of Human Resources. Her authority was real. She had rewritten the performance review framework in her first quarter, appointed her own evaluation committee, and built a relationship with the CFO that gave her a latitude most department heads did not have. She was good at her job in the ways that organizations reward. She moved quickly. She spoke with confidence that sounded like certainty. She understood that perception governed faster than evidence, and she governed perception accordingly. She also did not like Marcus. Not personally, at first. Professionally. He was the kind of employee who answered questions with more precision than she preferred. He cited regulatory codes in responses to internal memos. He corrected a classification error in a workforce reduction filing and CC'd legal without telling her first. After the third time, she told him in a one-on-one meeting, "Marcus, I need team players, not auditors." He said, "Understood." He started keeping a separate log that night. At home, before bed, Lily asked him to check under the bed. He checked. He said the coast was clear. She said, "Did you look for real or just pretend?" He got on his knees and looked with a flashlight. She said, "Okay. Good night." He trusted her completely too. The seed was already planted. For 11 months, in a password-protected folder on an encrypted personal drive, Marcus Webb had been maintaining what he privately called the record. Every classification irregularity. Every FMLA denial that didn't match the supporting documentation. Every performance review he had seen signed before the review meeting occurred. Every email chain where a decision happened before the process said it should. He was not planning to use it. He just needed it to exist. The demotion was announced on a Friday. On Monday, Marcus arrived at Bridgewater to find his office had been reassigned over the weekend. His nameplate was gone. His monitor had been moved to a shared workspace near the printer bay. 3 desks pushed together, a power strip taped to the floor. The space was for contractors and temporary staff. He sat down. He logged in. He began his day. By Wednesday, Sandra had scheduled a transition meeting. She brought 2 members of her evaluation committee, both junior HR associates who had been at Bridgewater less than a year. Sandra opened the meeting with a manila folder she did not open. She held it like a prop. "I want to make sure you understand the scope of the new role," she said. Marcus said, "I reviewed the job description. There will be a documentation checklist. Daily submissions to my office." She paused to let that land. "I want to be clear that accuracy is the primary expectation. Not interpretation. Not analysis. Accuracy." Marcus said, "What's the submission deadline?" She blinked. She had expected more. "End of day. 4:30. Marcus said. "Got it." One of the junior associates glanced at the other. Sandra continued. "The salary adjustment also reflects the change in classification. You'll see the updated offer letter by end of week. Benefits tier adjustment is included." Another pause. "I assume that's acceptable," Marcus said. "I'll review the letter." Sandra folded her hands on the table. "I hope you understand this isn't personal, Marcus. It's structural." Marcus said nothing. He called Lily at 5:15. She answered on the second ring. He asked how her day was. She said they had made volcanoes with baking soda. He said that sounded like a good Tuesday. She said it was Wednesday. He said he knew, he was testing her. She laughed. He told her nothing. 2 weeks later, Sandra sent a company-wide email announcing a new internal mentorship program. She listed the senior staff who would serve as mentors. Marcus was not on the list. His former junior, a man named Trevor who had been at the firm 18 months and who Marcus had personally trained, was listed as a senior mentor. The email went to all 47 staff members. Marcus read it at the printer bay. He printed a copy. He filed it. Around this time, a man named Gerald Okafor noticed. Gerald was the IT infrastructure lead. He had been at Bridgewater 9 years, longer than Sandra, longer than the current CFO. He did not say much in meetings. He was the person you called when your credentials stopped working or the VPN wouldn't connect. He had a son in college in Philadelphia, and he kept a photo of him on his monitor that he never mentioned. Gerald had watched the demotion announcement from 3 tables back. He had watched Marcus set his coffee cup on the windowsill. After the mentorship email, Gerald stopped by the printer bay. He said, "How you doing?" Marcus said, "Fine." Gerald said, "You need anything from IT? New login, new badge access." Marcus said, "I'm good." Gerald said, "Okay." He went back to his desk. He opened a ticketing system. He started pulling access logs. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He just had a feeling that specificity would arrive. 3 weeks after the demotion, Sandra presented a Q3 workforce report at the leadership meeting. The report cited improvements in HR compliance documentation accuracy. It included a chart. The chart attributed the improvements to a restructured documentation workflow that she had implemented. Marcus had designed that workflow 14 months ago. His name was not on the slide. 2 board members nodded approvingly. Marcus, who was not in the leadership meeting because junior documentation specialists did not attend, learned about the slide from a colleague who sent him a photo of the projected screen with a single word text, "Wow." He looked at the photo for a long time. He put his phone face down on the desk. He opened the record and made an entry dated that day. At home, Lily showed him a drawing she had made. It was of 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing outside a building with a flag. She said, "That's us outside your work. I made you look strong." The tall figure had a cape. Marcus kept the drawing. The final injustice came on a Thursday. Sandra issued a formal written warning to Marcus for insubordination related to documentation submission. The warning alleged that Marcus had submitted an FMLA analysis with unauthorized commentary. The analysis, which Marcus had filed because the documentation package had a federal reporting error that would have triggered an audit flag, had included a 2-paragraph annotation explaining the classification discrepancy. He had not been asked to interpret. He had only been asked to be accurate. The written warning went into his personnel file. Sandra sent a copy to the CFO. The CFO forwarded it to the board's HR compliance subcommittee. Marcus received the formal warning in a sealed envelope slid under his workstation keyboard. He picked up the envelope. He read it standing up, completely still. He set it on the desk. He straightened the edge so it aligned with the corner of the desk exactly. He folded his hands. He did not look at Sandra's office. He did not access the record. He did not speak to Gerald. He sat back down and finished the day's documentation by 4:15. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday, 11 days after the written warning. Marcus had taken the demotion salary in stride, adjusted, calculated, recalibrated. He had a modest savings buffer. He had Lily's school routine locked in. The arithmetic was tight, but it held. Then the building sold. New ownership. New rent structure. A letter from a property management company he'd never heard of informing him that his month-to-month lease would not be renewed. He had 45 days. He sat at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep and did the math 3 times. The same math. The same answer. There was no version of the current salary that kept them in the same school district. He opened his laptop. He opened the record. He sat for a long time looking at it. 11 months of entries. 47 documented irregularities. 8 FMLA misclassifications with supporting correspondence attached. 3 instances of retroactive performance review dating. He had the original email timestamps to prove it. 2 workforce reports with attribution errors. 1 email thread between Sandra and the CFO, forwarded to him by accident in a reply chain, that discussed his ceiling at the company 6 weeks before his formal performance review. He could end this tonight. He knew where to submit it. He knew the exact federal reporting channel for FMLA compliance violations. He knew the name of the Department of Labor regional office that handled employer retaliation cases. He knew the timelines. He knew the likely outcomes. He could also just send it to the board. He sat there for a long time. Lily's bedroom light was off. The stuffed rabbit, Biscuit, was visible through the crack in the door, silhouetted by the nightlight. Marcus closed the laptop. He had not built the record as a weapon. He had built it because someone should know the truth regardless of whether the truth ever mattered. Using it like this, in desperation, from a place of fear, felt like becoming something he did not want Lily to have for a father. He told himself, if you do this, you do it clean or you don't do it. He didn't do it. He started looking for apartments. That same week, the second crisis arrived not with a letter, but with a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered on his lunch break, sitting on a bench near the parking structure. It was an attorney. She identified herself as a family law associate. She said she had been contacted by a third party who had filed an inquiry regarding Lily's living situation. The inquiry alleged that Marcus's recent employment changes had created an unstable domestic environment, and requested a custodial review. Marcus asked who had filed the inquiry. The attorney said she wasn't able to share that at this stage. He said, "What do I need to do?" She told him. He wrote everything down on the back of a receipt. He hung up the phone. He looked at the parking structure. A pigeon was walking along the top edge. He watched it for a while. He called Lily's school and confirmed she would be there until 5:30. Then he went back inside. He didn't tell Lily about the apartment search. He framed the Saturday viewings as errands. She came with him, carrying Biscuit, unimpressed by the units he could afford but unbothered in the way children are when the adult beside them seems okay. One evening that week, Lily was doing homework at the table and Marcus was reviewing the record again. Not to act on it, just to think, and Lily looked up. She didn't ask what was on the screen. She didn't ask why he looked tired. She pulled her chair around the table so she was sitting beside him instead of across from him, and she put her head on his arm, and she went back to her homework. They sat like that for 40 minutes. The record was still open on the screen. The apartment listings were still open in the next tab. The attorney's number was still in his phone, unanswered from a follow-up call he hadn't been ready to take. Lily finished her worksheet. She said, "Dad, are you okay?" He looked at her. He said, "Yeah." She said, "Okay." She gathered her worksheets and went to bed. He sat at the table alone for another hour. He closed the record. He closed the laptop. He turned off the light. He did not sleep well. 2 floors above the printer bay, in the IT infrastructure office, Gerald Okafor was not sleeping well either, but for different reasons. What he had found in the access logs was not what he expected to find. He had been looking for signs of document manipulation, something he could characterize as a system integrity issue, something with enough ambiguity to report through IT channels without directly implicating HR. He was trying to find Marcus a handrail. What he found instead was a federal reporting flag. A Bridgewater subsidiary, a payroll processing arm used by 3 government contractors, had been filing quarterly wage reports through a certification portal that required an authorized compliance officer's digital signature. The signature on file was Marcus's. The reports filed in the last 8 months, after Marcus's demotion, after his system access to that portal had theoretically been revoked, still bore his credentials. Someone had been using Marcus's login to sign federal wage certifications. Gerald stared at the screen for a long time. He was not a compliance expert. He was an IT lead. But he had been in IT for 22 years and he knew what a federal audit flag looked like. He printed 3 copies of the access logs. He put one in a sealed envelope. He locked the other two in a filing drawer he shared with no one. He thought about it for 2 days. Then he made a call. The federal auditor's name was Patricia Huang. She arrived on a Wednesday morning with a colleague, a leather folio, and a laptop she set on the conference table in the same Harborview room where Sandra Keel had announced Marcus Webb's demotion 3 months earlier. She did not announce herself to HR. She had called the CFO directly, 2 days prior, citing a referral from the Department of Labor's Regional Compliance Office. The CFO had called the board's HR subcommittee. The board chair had called Sandra. Sandra had spent those 2 days preparing what she described to her assistant as a response framework. She was wearing the same blazer she wore to the all-hands. Patricia Huang did not look up from her laptop when Sandra walked in. "Ms. Keel," she said. "Please sit." Sandra sat. Patricia opened a folder. "I want to start with the wage certification filings for fiscal quarters Q1 and Q2 of this year. Specifically, the digital signature credentials on record for the authorized compliance officer on the Bridgewater Federal Payroll subsidiary," Sandra said. "Of course. Our compliance documentation is fully in order. We recently restructured that function to ensure greater accuracy," Patricia said. "The credentials belong to Marcus Webb." Sandra paused. "Mr. Webb," Patricia continued, "who was demoted to a non-signatory role 8 months ago, and whose portal access was, according to your own HR records, revoked at the time of reclassification." She looked up. "Those filings are federal certifications, signed by a person whose authority to sign them you had formally revoked. Would you like to explain that?" Sandra's mouth opened. She closed it. She said, "There may have been a transition lag in the system." Patricia said, "The access logs show active authentication from Mr. Webb's credentials on 4 separate certification dates after his demotion. The IP addresses are internal. The timestamps are business hours." She turned the laptop screen toward Sandra. This was not a lag. Marcus was in the printer bay when his phone buzzed. It was Gerald. The message was 3 words. "Conference room. Now." He walked up the stairs. He had never been asked to go to the Harborview conference room during a workday as a documentation specialist. He knocked on the glass door. Patricia Huang looked up. "Marcus Webb," he said. "Yes," she said. "Please come in." Sandra was still sitting at the table. She was looking at the far wall. She did not look at Marcus. 2 members of the board's HR subcommittee were sitting to Patricia's left. The CFO was standing near the window. There were 7 people in the room. Marcus recognized all of them. Patricia said, "Mr. Webb, I've been reviewing the federal wage certification filings for the Bridgewater subsidiary. I'd like to ask you some questions about the compliance documentation procedures during your tenure as senior compliance analyst." Marcus sat down across from her. He put his hands flat on the table. He said, "Ask me anything." For the next 40 minutes, Marcus answered every question. He spoke without notes. He cited CFR citations from memory. He explained the workflow he had designed 14 months earlier. He walked through the certification protocol step by step. He was precise. He was calm. He was exactly as accurate as Sandra had instructed him to be, and considerably more. At one point, Patricia asked him if he had documentation of the original workflow design. Marcus said, "Yes." She said, "Can you produce it?" He said, "Today." Patricia nodded. She made a note. She then turned to Sandra and asked about the performance review that had accompanied the demotion. She asked to see the evaluation committee's notes. She asked for the original written warning. She asked for the documented basis for the FMLA denial on file for a current employee named Rachel Thorpe, a name that appeared in Marcus's record, though no one in the room knew that yet. Sandra's answers became shorter, and then shorter still. The CFO moved from the window to a chair. At one point, Sandra looked at Marcus directly. It was the first time that morning. Her expression had collapsed inward. Not into guilt, exactly, but into the particular blankness of a person watching the architecture of a very careful construction start to come apart. Marcus looked back at her. He said nothing. That was all. In the hallway outside, Gerald was standing near the elevator. He heard none of the conversation. The room was soundproof, but he could see through the glass. He watched Marcus sit at the center of the table. He watched the board members lean in to listen. He watched the federal auditor nod. He went back to his desk. He called his son in Philadelphia. At the end of the meeting, Patricia asked everyone except Marcus to step outside. She said, "Mr. Webb, I want you to know, off the record, that the information that was forwarded to us was extraordinarily detailed and well documented. Whoever compiled it understood federal compliance architecture at a level I rarely see outside of DOL staff," Marcus said. "It needed to exist." Patricia looked at him. "The formal process will take time. But I want you to be prepared for a significant procedural outcome," Marcus said. "I understand." He stood up. He picked up his notebook. He looked at the room, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the bay outside, the spot near the door where he had set down his coffee 3 months ago. He walked out. Lily was in after-school care. At 5:20 he called her. She answered on the second ring. He said, "Hey." She said, "Hi, Daddy." "Guess what I did today?" he said. "Tell me." She did. He listened. He stood in the parking lot of Bridgewater Compliance Solutions and listened to his daughter talk for 9 minutes about a craft project involving tissue paper and spray bottles. And at no point did his voice change or his hands stop being steady. When she was done, she said, "Are you still at work?" He said, "Just leaving." She said, "Okay. Can we have pasta tonight?" He said, "Yeah." She said, "Okay. Bye, Daddy." He said, "Bye, Lil." He stood in the parking lot a little while longer. Then he went to get her. 5 months later, Sandra Keel resigned from Bridgewater Compliance Solutions on a Monday. The formal announcement cited a mutual agreement to pursue new opportunities. There was no farewell email. The evaluation committee she had appointed was dissolved. The HR department was placed under a restructuring review led by the board's HR subcommittee and an outside consultant. The Department of Labor investigation into the federal wage certification irregularities resulted in a compliance order requiring Bridgewater to remediate the affected filings, repay regulatory fees, and implement supervised HR practices for a period of 18 months. The names attached to the findings were not publicized. The consequences were not small. 3 weeks after the federal audit concluded, Marcus Webb was offered his senior compliance analyst position back. The offer letter included a retroactive salary correction and a formal written acknowledgement that the demotion had not been procedurally sound. He read the letter at the kitchen table. He read it twice. He set it on the table. He went to Lily's room. She was arranging Biscuit in a new position on the windowsill. Apparently Biscuit now needed to face the window instead of the room, a change Lily had decided on that morning for reasons she considered self-evident. She did not look up. She said, "Do you think rabbits like sunlight?" Marcus said, "I think they probably do." She said, "Me too." He stood in the doorway of her room and watched her arrange the animals along the sill. Biscuit at one end, a small grey elephant at the other, 3 creatures in between in an order only Lily understood. And he thought about all the things she had not asked him over the last 5 months. The apartment viewings she had attended without complaint. The dinners that were simpler than they used to be. The evenings she had sat beside him at the table and not said a word. She trusted him. She had always trusted him. Not because he had won. Not because he had fought. Not because he had exposed Sandra Keel or filed a grievance or sent the record to anyone. She trusted him because he had stayed steady. Because when everything tried to make him small, he had simply stubbornly, quietly, remained exactly who he was. Power that depends on keeping others small is not power at all. It is fear with a title. Sandra Keel was skilled, calculated, and certain of her position. She understood hierarchy. She understood optics. She understood that most people, when demoted and humiliated, will either fight in ways that can be used against them or collapse in ways that confirm the verdict. Marcus did neither. He waited. Not strategically. Not tactically. He waited the way people wait when they know what they know and trust that the truth does not expire. The reversal came not because Marcus acted, but because he had already acted, months before the demotion, with every careful entry in the record. The truth had already been documented. It only needed someone with access to the right system to find it. Gerald Okafor found it. And then Marcus Webb, who had been told he had no place at the table, was the only person in that room who could answer every question. Here is the question I want you to sit with today. When someone wrongs you publicly, when they demote you, humiliate you in front of 43 colleagues, take credit for your work, laugh about it at the company retreat, and you have the documentation, the evidence, the power to bring them down yourself, do you use it? Or do you let the truth do the work? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the person who had to stay quiet when every part of you wanted to speak, share it with someone who has been underestimated. They need to know that staying dignified is not the same as losing. Subscribe to Solo Dad Stories and ring the bell. Every week we bring you stories about dignity, justice, and the quiet strength it takes to say nothing when everything in you wants to speak. Marcus is still at Bridgewater. He goes to Lily's school events. He braids her hair, better now, though she still says the crooked ones were her favorite. Biscuit faces the window.